Good morning. I'm really thankful that this started an hour later today so I can get a little sleep. All right, so thank you for the introduction. You sort of already know who I am now. As David said, I am an SRE at Spotify, which basically means that I either break shit or fix shit other people break. In actuality, an SRE at Spotify is basically building infrastructure that other back-end devs use, which is a lot of fun. But I'm still on call for all of Spotify, so please don't page me and break Spotify. But you also might see me tweeting cats as I'm trying to fix incidents, because if I get paged, the agreement is I tweet my own cats pictures. I work a lot in FOSS internally, free and open source software. I help a lot of folks release their projects under the Spotify GitHub organization. As already said, I help lead PyLadies, more so on the global level lately. And PyLadies is a mentorship group to help women and friends in the increased diversity in the Python community. So today's talk, I actually keynoted PyCon in 2013, or PyCon Canada, and it was inspired by what Edward Snowden revealed during that time. A lot of things were exposed when he released a bunch of papers from the NSA and the CIA and whatnot. So I thought it would be fun to take this opportunity to follow up on what I presented on, give a deeper historical context, and the addition of how to make your own little covert espionage program in Python. Some folks might be wondering why I choose to speak on this topic to begin with. And to be honest, I kind of wonder that myself. This talk essentially comes from an inexplicable need or interest to learn and know everything about espionage. I just love it. I have a ton of books on the Cold War. I studied abroad in Prague. One of my favorite TV shows is The Americans. I don't know if anyone else watches that. Maybe it's only in America. There's a bunch of board games about the Cold War that I love to play. When I was a teenager, I read a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And it was all about how the US surreptitiously influenced other countries in their economic development. And actually inspired me to study economics in college. But looking back now, I should have known that it was more so the espionage and the sabotage that interest me rather than economics, because clearly I don't really do anything in my degree now. But it's also clear that it's not just economics and economic development that the US exerts their influence upon. So when Edward Snowden came forward in 2013, I was essentially a vacuum for all these top secret surveillance programs that are now being revealed into the public eye. And as I read on, the more I realized that it's not actually that hard to do with the tools that are widely used and freely available to us right now, which is kind of a bit scary, but of course I had to try it out myself. So the agenda for this talk, I'll give a quick overview about who is doing the spying, and then give some historical context about what they've been doing and how we got to where we are today. Followed by how the spying is being done and why, or trying to convince you that you should care and why it matters. And I'll finish off with how this can be mimicked with a few Python tools. What this talk is not. I have to be explicit, I'm not condoning what the NSA, the CSE, the GCHQ, all the alphabet soup, I'm not condoning what they're doing. I'm not going to tell you how to avoid being tracked and to be spied upon. And I'm not encouraging you on spying on your friends or family or patrons of free Wi-Fi. Also, obligatory disclaimer, I'm not affiliated with any of these. I'm also not a lawyer, nor am I a black or a white hat. I'm just an average engineer that likes to play one on the stage. All right, so who's involved? Let's set the stage a little bit. So we have a group called the Five Eyes. I'll give a little bit more historical context about who they are, or how they got there. But it's essentially the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And so while there are multiple agencies within each country that are involved with like the Five Eyes and the data sharing that happens, the predominant ones are the National Security Agency in the US, the Government Communications Headquarters in the UK, the Australian Signals Directorate, Canada's Communications Security Establishment, and New Zealand's Security Intelligence Service. We then have the Nine Eyes, which now includes France, Denmark, Netherlands, and Norway. Germany felt a bit excluded, so we now have the 14 Eyes, which includes 9 Eyes plus Germany, and then Belgium, Italy, Spain, and Sweden. And then we have 41 Eyes, or 40 Eyes, I've lost count, which is like 14 Eyes plus all those that participated in the US coalition in Afghanistan in 2001. So maybe visualizing this, you can see that it might be difficult to maintain one's privacy. So what exactly are they doing? I want to make it known that this is not an exhaustive list. It's also quite heavily US focused, but there is a significant amount of international intelligence sharing and cooperation going on. Among this timeline that I'm going to share, there are many projects or focused efforts around like particular missions and goals. So when you place that into like political and international context and all threaded together, develops a picture that is both overwhelmingly unnerving and logical and predictive almost. So international espionage dates back earlier than this, but I chose to start here since it was during and like post-World War I that we really see a heavy investment in signal intelligence. So the origins of the Five Eyes group is actually traced back to 1941, where the Allies from World War II set goals for a post-war world. In 1946, a secret treaty called the UK-USA Agreement was signed, and that was essentially the foundation of the US's and the UK's cooperation on intelligence sharing. In 1948, Canada joined, followed by Australia and New Zealand in 1956. So the purpose of this is to share the signal intelligence among each other, and how they do that is each country would surveil a set of other countries. So for example, the US would focus on Latin America, Australia would focus on South and East Asia, et cetera, and share that among each other. And so while these, like US and the UK say they don't technically spy on themselves, or they at least deny that, there's no stopping Canada from sharing data collected on US citizens and vice versa. So this is our first project, Project Shamrock, that is known at least. Is essentially a continuation of the US military's work from World War II. And it's probably the largest government interception program in the US during that time. Shamrock is considered an espionage exercise where the military was given direct access to daily copies of all incoming, outgoing, and in-transit telegrams via the 3 major telegram companies at that time. The predecessor to this project is basically a lieutenant in the military just went up to one of the major telecom companies, or telegram companies, just to ask to be assigned to the company. And then the lieutenant just took photographs of all international commercial cablegrams. So about 150,000 messages a month were being reviewed and analyzed by the NSA, all without warrant. And they would also pass along information to other agencies like the FBI, CIA, et cetera. We then have the formation of Canada's Communications Security Establishment in 1946. It was exposed nearly 3 decades later. It originally stems World War II with the capturing of foreign electronic communications under the National Research Council, and then it was transferred to National Defense in 1975. So while the CSE was formed before the NSA has roots in World War I. And then in 1929, the cryptanalytic section of the US military was shut down by the then Secretary of State, him saying, "Gentlemen do not read each other's mail." The first US government organization to take part specifically in signal intelligence was the aptly named Signals Intelligence Service within the Army in 1930. It went through a few iterations over the years with different names and different and shifting directives, including the Signal and Security Agency, Army Security Agency, and Armed Forces Security Agency. It was a bit chaotic and a lot of lack of focus and organization. So in 1952, it was redesignated as a national security agency with a more clear outline and purpose. Interestingly enough, since the redesignation of the NSA was in a classified memo, its existence was not public until a few decades later. Before its exposure within the intelligence community, the NSA was known as no such agency. Another project from the US, it's a sister project to Shamrock. While formally operating in the late 60s to the early 70s, Project Minaret started to form in 1962. It first started with the NSA forming a watch list of Americans traveling to Cuba, and then expanding that to narcotic traffickers. In 1967, names of activists within the anti-Vietnam War movement were added by President Johnson, followed by President Nixon adding civil rights leaders, journalists, and even a couple of senators. So the list included folks like Martin Luther King Jr., Muhammad Ali, Jane Fonda. Funnily enough, Senator Frank Church was also on this list, and he's actually the one to later discover this project a decade later. So Project Minaret operated without warrant and produced reports for nearly 6,000 foreigners and 4,000 US citizens. Echelon is a surveillance program ran by the Five Eyes group. It was formally established in 1971, but technically started in the late 60s. It was first started to monitor military and diplomatic communications of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. However, it grew into a global system for interception of private and commercial communications. So in the 90s, it was suspected that the US was using Echelon for industrial espionage. And in 2001, it was recommended to the European Parliament to encourage its citizens to encrypt their communications to maintain privacy, as economic espionage was being conducted by the US. 1972, there's this case, the US versus US District Court. It was known as the Keith case, named after the presiding judge. The Supreme Court unanimously rules that the government must comply with the Fourth Amendment when surveilling an alleged domestic intelligence threat. And so this is actually pretty interesting. The case was against a few men who were a part of a group called the White Panther Party. It was essentially a radical, anti-racist, pro-Black Panther Party group of white Americans. And they were charged for a conspiracy to destroy government property. But in a pretrial motion, the defendants wanted the disclosure of the electronic surveillance information that the government had, presumably on the defendants themselves. And so Nixon got his attorney general to then claim that he authorized the wiretapping because the defendants were members of a domestic organization attempting to destroy the government. So now at this point, warrants are required for domestic surveillance after decades of intelligence collection already happening. The mid-70s aired a lot of government's dirty laundry. In 1974, the Rockefeller Commission under the US president investigated the CIA and revealed the fact that they had been spying on dissident groups and opening up mail, as well as mind control studies like MK Ultra, which funnily enough was also conducted here in Montreal. Stemming from a lot of frightening press about the government's surveilling activities, the Church Committee, led by Frank Church, investigated the abuses of the NSA, the CIA, FBI, and the IRS, which revealed Project Shamrock and Project Minaret, which those projects were soon terminated right after that. As a result of those committees' investigations was the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA. FISA basically establishes how and when federal law and intelligence agencies can spy on people. Essentially, no court order is needed if one wants to surveil two foreign powers, but then one is needed if at least one of the parties is a US citizen. And FISA also set up a secret court to hear requests for warrants in the same manner that ordinary courts would. But because it's a matter of national security, these requests are classified. So with the FISA Act, a program called Blarney started. And it allows the US to tap directly into major connection points of communication, including wireless and telecommunications. It targets communications that are likely to be foreign intelligence or have foreign intelligence, which is kind of ambiguous. And with the timing of everything, I can't help but assume that Blarney is just a reincarnation of the Project Shamrock under legal pretenses. So we are collecting all this data, and now we need to store that. Revealed in 2008, but it was implemented in 1982, Main Core is a database containing personal and financial information of millions of US citizens that are deemed a threat to national security. The data comes from various agencies, including the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, and is stored without warrant. Jumping forward 15 years here now, not because there isn't anything interesting going on, but it just hasn't been revealed, or it's hard to pinpoint when things have started. But in 1997, the FBI implemented a system called Carnivore in order to monitor electronic communications by essentially being able to customize a packet filter, a packet sniffer, spying on all internet traffic generated by particular people that they're interested in. And they were able to do this by installing this program directly on an internet service provider system. It only ended in 2005 because it was replaced by a new and improved commercial software, which doesn't sit right with me that commercial software exists like that. So the attacks on 9/11 brought a significant shift in the mindset within the NSA. Before, it was more about compliance with FISA. However, afterwards, it became, how can we circumvent the law? So the White House came to the NSA essentially asking what more can be done against terrorism if the NSA had more power. Of course, the NSA has plenty of projects that were previously denied or deemed illegal that they could bring up. So they brought up this one plan that was deemed illegal in 1999, and this plan essentially performs contact chaining on metadata that it had collected, where they would follow US phone numbers for any foreign connections. So of course, President Bush gives the NSA authority to begin targeting terrorist-associated phone numbers. And then the president and the cabinet sort of scrambled to draft an authorization to spy on Americans because none yet existed. So the president then signs the order that allows the NSA's domestic spying program, and then the US Attorney General at the time was told to just sign it. So with that, the spying program is now deemed illegal, triggering the NSA to feel that it has authorization to spy on US calls and emails without warrant. And so off they go. In 2002, some undisclosed private sector telecoms and internet providers in the US received letters from the NSA requesting support for their domestic spying program and to hand over data, including call records. Then later that year, these telecoms formally enter into a voluntary agreement with the US to give data to the NSA. And then the Washington Post exposes them in 2006, and only after that did the companies request court orders from the NSA instead of voluntarily handing over data. In 2003, the construction of a secret room, now famously known as Room 641A, was in AT&T's San Francisco facility. It was equipped with special technology that can read and analyze tens of thousands of communications per second, and then store those communications in some central database. So this program formally started in 2003 with the renaming as Terrorist Information Awareness. But it started development in the beginning of 2000, and it was aimed at gathering detailed information about individuals to anticipate and prevent crimes. It was referred to as the Manhattan Project of counterterrorism and used many components of older programs. The Congress actually does stop this in late 2003, but many parts were absorbed and adopted into other programs, like the next one. So there's Turbulence, which isn't actually one specific program, but is a name for a collection of a bunch of programs. And these efforts include decrypting communications, injecting malware into computers, and a database collecting metadata on random pieces of information like email addresses. In late 2005, the New York Times actually exposes the NSA in their warrantless spying on Americans. And President Bush does confirm it, but of course not without the twist of like it's for national security. The New York Times also reveals that the NSA spying is purely domestic, with some telecoms giving the NSA backdoor access to the communication streams. Mainway supposedly started 7 months before the 9/11 attacks and was revealed in 2006. The NSA essentially starts storing metadata of all call records that go through AT&T and what is now AT&T and Verizon. There are an estimated 1.9 trillion records in that database, with records being stored up to 5 years. And then revealed in 2013, Dropmeyer is yet another surveillance program, started in 2007, and this one particularly targets foreign embassies and diplomatic staff, including the G20 summit for a few years. So after the New York Times article exposing NSA back in 2005, an unknown company requests the NSA to issue court orders rather than them voluntarily handing over data. But then in 2007, seemingly reaction to that request, the Protect America Act was passed, allowing the NSA to not need warrants for collecting communications. So we're starting to get a little bit more modern. While it was revealed in 2013, Tempora was tested in 2008 and fully operational in 2011. Its purpose is to basically buffer all the internet traffic that passes through the UK's fiber connection points so that they can be searched and analyzed later on. And with this, it's supposed that the UK actually collects more metadata than the NSA. This is actually a bit startling for me because you have to imagine the amount of technology needed for this. In a trial in 2011, the GCHQ set up probes on more than 200 internet links, each carrying 10 gigabytes of data a second. In 2013, work was being done to support data flow of 100 megabits a second, which is about a petabyte of data a day per link. And so this data is then preserved for 3 days, while metadata is preserved for 30 days. The Guardian revealed another GCHQ program in 2014 called Optic Nerve. The program was intercepting webcam images from millions of Yahoo users who were not even suspected of any wrongdoing. They were just collecting indiscriminately. One released secret document mentioned the use of face detection for like mugshots and like general facial recognition. And it was also revealed that one still image was taken every 5 minutes per user that it was paying attention to. So it feels a bit like 1984, but apparently it's okay in the UK because it doesn't require law to minimize a collection from its own citizens, unlike the NSA. And it is said that Yahoo was chosen because it is known to be used by GCHQ targets. But in my opinion, I think Yahoo Messenger was chosen because its protocol is unencrypted. Because the government wants companies to comply, the US Congress passes amendments to FISA that allows telecoms retroactive legal immunity from lawsuits for those who cooperated with the NSA. So now customers cannot sue companies who have violated their privacy and their rights. And this was because it was all in good faith. Hacienda is a UK data reconnaissance tool where it port scans entire countries. Supposedly, 27 countries have been scanned. They are particularly interested in stuff like FTP, HTTP, HTTPS, SSH, among others, and are looking for vulnerable services that run on these ports. The collected information is shared to and used by the Five Eyes group to launch exploits and to steal data. And scarily enough, it can infect non-governmental machines to complete scans, building their own botnet, essentially, and enabling a complete scan for a country or for a subnet for vulnerable devices within 5 minutes. And best of all, it only takes like a simple email request for the data. Something good that actually came out of this, though, is an internet draft, a proposed modification to TCP. It's called TCP stealth to hide ports, to hide open ports of TCP services. Canada is not free of guilt either. Revealed by the CBC News in 2016, the CSE has been covertly monitoring huge amounts of Canadian emails as part of their own domestic cybersecurity operation. Everything listed here on this slide, if you can see it, is pretty scary. The agency is not allowed to eavesdrop on Canadian communications, but they can be granted special exemptions if its efforts are linked to protecting government infrastructure. Just kind of seems like a broad exception. May 2012, the CSC presents a proof of concept, essentially using public Wi-Fi at airports to identify individual users. This can then be used to track folks when they check into various places like hotels and restaurants and such. So there's this program called Stone Ghost. It's operated by the US Defense Intelligence Agency. It's a network of information sharing and exchange between the Five Eyes countries. And in 2012, a Royal Canadian naval officer pleads guilty to actually having downloaded information from the Stone Ghost system and selling it to GRU, which is Russia's successor to the KGB. Apparently, he just walks into the Russian embassy in Ottawa in 2007 offering to sell these secret information. And he was quoted to say, I find this kind of funny, he was quoted to say, it was never really Canadian stuff. There was American stuff, and some British stuff, Australian stuff. It was everybody's stuff. So mid-2013 was when Edward Snowden came forward. Many projects and programs were revealed, including these. There's Fairview and Stormbrew, which are two sister projects of upstream collection with voluntary cooperation with AT&T and Verizon. There is Muscular, which allows warrantless data siphoning from Yahoo and Google without their knowledge, until now. There is Bull Run, which is particularly nerve-wracking, but I would expect no less. It's an NSA program for cracking encryption with current methods and storing encrypted data for future breakthroughs. There's the Royal Concierge from GCHQ to track bookings made at particular hotels. And the Washington Post then exposes the PRISM and X keyscore. So PRISM stands for the Planning Tool for Resource Integration, Synchronization, and Management, a bunch of buzzwords, but it essentially mines electronic data, collecting intelligence that passes through US servers. And it's meant to target foreigners, but the NSA has been very elusive about any data that it might collect on US citizens. And then there's X keyscore, which is what they refer to as Digital Network Intelligence Exploitation System. And it's basically a federated query system of completely unfiltered data. And this gives users ability to query for email addresses, targets activities, phone numbers, HTTP traffic, extract file attachments, all that you can imagine. And then in 2014, Dishfire was revealed. It's actually a pretty scary one. I mean, they're all pretty scary, but this one in particular. So the NSA and GSHQ essentially collect 200 million text messages every day from all over the world, including geolocation data, names of electronic business cards, like those V-card things, border crossings, financial transactions, and missed call alerts. Also revealed in 2014, but it kind of started in 2009, is a program called Mystic. And it's yet another telecom surveillance program, but this one collects entire countries' phone calls, and not just metadata, but actual recording conversations. Countries that have been targeted for this program include Kenya, Afghanistan, Mexico, Bahamas, and the Philippines. And then some documents from 2013 allude to extending the program to other countries. Badass was revealed in 2015, and give points for naming creativity here. It's a joint program between the CSE and the GCHQ, which exploits privacy weaknesses in mobile apps and uses the same technologies that advertisers do, including user location, their app preferences, and unique device identifiers. That was a lot. All right, so how are they doing it? You might be wondering. Basically, they're drinking directly from the fire hose. So Tier 1, which is the backbone of the internet, allows vast amounts of data to flow via the simplest path. Tier 1 companies include Level 3, AT&T, Verizon, Deutsche Telekom, and about 15 others, and some even own their own transatlantic cables. Major companies like Facebook, Microsoft, Google, they tap directly into a tier 1 via edges, or they also own their own transatlantic cables. And then the NSA essentially covertly does the same thing. They tap edges shared with the tier 1 companies. It's also a bit of brute force, probably. There's a program called Muscular, so I assume that they're strong-arming Google and Yahoo network directly. But I also couldn't help perpetuate the notion that there's always a relevant XKCD comic. Hopefully you can see that, maybe. So you might be thinking, why does this matter, or why should I care? So first off, there's a lot of unanswered questions. How do companies not notice being backdoored? Either their security sucks, or they are lying. How is foreignness determined? Am I roped in because I interact daily with non-US citizens? Or maybe because I'm here in Canada? Are you all a target now because you are one hop away from me? What is done with data that's accidentally collected on Americans? There have been articles about the NSA agents spying on ex-lovers, tracking people's porn habits, a lot of fun things. And finally, how secure is this information? Whether I'm foreign or not, if these agencies are able to crack encryption, I'm sure that there are black hats that can do the same. Or perhaps more likely, I don't know if their database admin actually changed like default passwords. So what? You've got nothing to hide, you're not a criminal, why should you care? So I ask you, like, do you have curtains in or blinds in your windows? Maybe you'd like to show me your credit card bills? Text messages, can I read those? I would say no to that. Something that is also, I found interesting, this slide is actually taken from the FF presentation at 30C3 back in December 2013, and it shows why metadata matters. So they know that you rang a phone sex service at 2:24 a.m., spoke for 18 minutes, but they don't know what you talked about. They know that you called the suicide prevention hotline from the Golden Gate Bridge, but the topic remains secret. They know that you spoke with an HIV testing service, and then your doctor, then your health insurance company within the same hour, but they do not know what is discussed. So it's kind of obvious that what they do collect can tell a significant story, and whether or not that you're okay with them allowing unknown watchers into your life, that is your call. But just because I have stuff to hide does not mean that I'm a criminal or should be a target of surveillance. I mean, I have 10-year-old Facebook posts that I would be very embarrassed about now if it were public. All right, so sort of enough seriousness. Let's see how we can do this ourselves. And we gotta look the part first, so pardon me. I mean, this is what the media says, that like, that black hoodie, right? Right? And then like, I don't know, these interesting little gloves that are like cut off. Yeah? I told you I like to play a black hat like on stage. All right, here we go, now I'm ready. All right, so tools used. There are a few different Python libraries here, the main one being Scapy, which is just basically a TCP dump or Wireshark for Python. So the overall idea is just the wiretapping part with some filters. If you actually want to store data, you probably need a lot of service or a lot of resources, and you need a lot of space. You need like a database that you can query and stuff like that. But this is meant to be like a proof of concept of how one can collect particular data, mimicking like the NSA. Another obligatory statement, just a proof of concept, no warranty. I'm not condoning traffic sniffing, spying. But if you were to, you would need open Wi-Fi, and there's a Starbucks down the street if you're curious. That's not what I did. So a quick intro to Scapy. Hopefully you can see some of this code. This makes me cringe, but apparently this is the way that you use Scapy, import star. So here's a basic sniff functionality. You give it a filter. Here I'm just filtering for HTTP traffic and only grabbing the first 10 packets. And so we can take a look at what we're given. You can see that we have 10 TCP packets. The results, it's snipped, but like these are two of the 10 packets that we would get. So if we take a look, we can use like a pretty printing sort of function that Scapy gives us. I clipped out some data, but you can see we see the Ethernet, the IP layer, and the TCP layer. And that's basically like all that we're using and extrapolating upon. So since I wanted super slick code names too, I've named this one Tempura, like tempura, but the food. So this particular snippet is inspired by the X-keyscore program. Basically, show me everyone that has searched for a certain term. So here I'm just like importing an older PCAP file that I've saved. But if you were to actively sniff, you can like use this filter, for example, TCP and like that specific host. And that's how you can save it for later. So we have like 300 TCP packets. You can get a quick summary of the first like 19. I was spot checking a few, and I saw that packet number 80 was of interest. And so here, if you get that layer thing, you still get the Ethernet, IP, and TCP, but there's also like a raw payload data. Now we can grab that directly and see that there. Then we can kind of parse it. Whenever you send queries, it's like usually question mark, foo equals whatever. So that's essentially what I did here. And my first search result was Montreal. And then my second search result, best chocolate in Montreal. Third result, about some like 160 or 180 packets later, best coffee in Montreal. You can see where my priorities lie. So you might have noticed that I was using like Yahoo. This is actually an older search a few years ago, older packet collection. This is because until recently, Yahoo search was over unencrypted network, over just HTTP. They have since switched, so that's why it was like ridiculously easy. So the next snippet, I'm calling omnivore, like carnivore. It's an X-keyscore query that it might be something like, show me everyone from a certain country that has visited a certain extremist forum. I didn't dare visit an extremist forum, but this is sort of the general approach. So again, the filter, the TCP filter and the particular host. I had some offline data, and you can see I have 258 TCP packets. We're grabbing one randomly. You can see that there's a payload there. I was just too embarrassed to actually search for or visit an extremist forum, so I just went to PyLadies. So obviously, some extremist term is not in that payload. You can use Scapy's traceroute functionality. This is like a quick and dirty wrapper around Scapy's traceroute to just get the source IPs of the packets. Trace routing Spotify for funsies. Get a bunch of IP addresses. I'm using PyGeoIP to plot or to get the coordinates of those IP addresses from the GeoIP database that MaxMine publishes. So here are the coordinates, and then I'm using GeoJSON, which is just a geographical information in JSON form. And you can it's a quick and dirty script here too, and then create a sort of GeoJSON file. You can use GitHub's gist functionality to actually render it, which I found kind of awesome. But this gives a pretty good idea of what can be accessed. So here I think I started the search in Montreal area for or the traceout for Spotify.com, which has a server in Sweden, multiple servers. But you can see that it's not a direct connection, that it actually passes through US servers, which is considered their jurisdiction. All right, snippet 3. For my next trick, I've named this Teflon, because that's what echelon sounds like to me. Here we're trying to answer the question of, give me all emails with a certain term in the body of the email. So here's a filter for SMTP traffic, for email traffic. I had some offline PCAP file already. Here's a bunch of packets. If we just pick one, We can see there's some like raw payload data. We can grab that. And that kind of looks encoded, so I decode it. There's the email address. If we take the following packet and do the same thing, get another encoded string, decode it, it's a password prompt. Take the following packet, I wonder what this could be, a password. So we can, here's a quick and dirty filter packet by a string. So given a packet, return if it's, or print if something if it's what I'm looking for. So I can give it any sort of packet, and I'm looking for like attachment to see if something has been attached to an email. And there are actually plenty, and I only just grabbed like the first few lines of one. So that's ridiculously easy. Yeah, that's a quick snippet. Snippet 4, I named this cold brew because there is one called storm brew, and I craved cold brew after that. So here we're wanting to see the chats for a given user during a certain time frame. So we're searching or sniffing for IRC traffic. I had some IRC cat file, and showing we see a bunch of stuff, also some DNS queries. And sort of pretty printing, you can see some conversations happening. Again, using my quick and dirty packet filter for a string. And you can see if I'm interested in the user Amarok, I can easily find private messages from Amarok. Final snippet. I had a craving after Shamrock for Lucky Charms. So this snippet, we're trying to mimic the Hacienda program to find all exploitable machines in a certain country. So this particular IP address, it's actually the host for the service or website that former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani owns. Supposedly he owns an InfoSec consultancy company. In January, when President-elect Trump named him as his security advisor, cybersecurity advisor, this site came to be known on the internet and on Reddit and stuff. But it's actually pretty hilarious because of what was found with this port scan. So it's really easy to scan using Python's mmap. And there's a lot more here that I had to cut. But we basically get a list back of exposed ports and services. There's like OpenSSH version that was like 10 years old, anonymous LDAP, and MySQL database exposed. You can also see that the site was running like a 5-year-old version of Joomla with unpatched vulnerabilities. So with this kind of information, you can easily figure out what you can exploit. It's not like all the information on CVEs and exploits aren't already readily available. I'm not condoning that. And if we were curious about where this server was, we can do the same sort of plotting of IP addresses to coordinates to GeoJSON, and we can see that Rudy Giuliani's server is located in Denver. Unfortunately, you can't scan it anymore because the host was down for obvious reasons, but yeah, it was fun while it lasted. So wrapping up, perhaps I sufficiently scared you. Maybe you're already architecting a new bunker with tinfoil hats, maybe some canned goods and signal scramblers. Maybe I've inspired you to be a script kiddie yourself. Just don't blame me when you're caught. So the purpose of this talk was to show what's going on with the world, as well as convey how easy it is to pick up this stuff. Even if you're not an aspiring black hat, you do need the look though, right? As I mentioned in the beginning, this talk isn't to teach you how to protect yourself, because in all honesty, and I hate to say this, there's probably not a corner that you can hide in that can't be uncovered. There are certainly provisions that one can take, but as they say in the security industry, the defensive side will always be on the losing end of this fight. There will always be adversaries finding new exploits. So instead, I'll close with the same quote that I did in my 2013 keynote, quote by Martin Niemöller. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I am not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. and then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Thank you.